Of Riga conference, and this is the second day. And I walked around yesterday late at night, and I interviewed a couple of you and asked, what are philosophical reflections from yesterday? And here are some of them. Everybody is living at the front line now. It's not the peace, but not the war. If you want something, you find ways. If you don't, you find reasons. We are here. We are only getting stronger. Such meetings as this help to find common ground more easily in difficult issues. And it feels good to sense that we are thinking in the same direction. And also we are in the same boat with Ukraine. So today we have continuing to discussing these issues, and we are very happy for those who are watching us online. Good morning. And also just a reminder that we are in Riga. It's raining outside, but we're a really nice house of science, which is the place for students and bright minds. And about today.
Yes, we have a very packed program today, so be sure to also check out the conference program online on the conference website. I think the minimum expectation is that today we will put all the pressing policy debates to rest on topics such as transatlantic relations, defense innovation, defense tech, what the hell is going on in Russia, domestically and in terms of its external aggression, external repression, and of course security issues in the Baltic Sea, which are close to heart for many of you here. And of course with that, the overarching questions of where does Europe fit in this new increasingly fragmented world order? How does Europe protect its values, protect its systems, its institutions in this increasingly dangerous jungle? And to answer these questions, we will begin with a keynote speech by the President of the European Parliament, Ms. Roberta Metsola. Madam President, the floor is yours.
Good morning to you all. Ministers, dear ambassadors, distinguished guests, colleagues, participants, members of the European Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me here today. It matters that we are here in Latvia at this critical moment in our story. The Baltics' geography tells its own story. To the west, incidents in the Baltic Sea are on the rise. To the east, neighbors are growing more aggressive. The Suwalki Gap is one of the more critical points in the world. Here, in Latvia, you know what it means to live at the edge of freedom. You remember what could happen, what has happened. And the point I concede to all the Latvian members of Parliament is that we should have listened to you sooner. For years, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Finland, you all warned us about what was coming. You warned after the annexation of Crimea, the Kremlin-sponsored disinformation campaigns sowing discord in our societies, about the hybrid attacks on critical infrastructure, another one as recently as last week. You kept warning us about what is happening in Zapad in 2017, in 2021. The joint Russia-Belarus military drills that took place just a few weeks ago prove that Russia is still rattling its saber. And you warned us about the Russian troop buildup before their illegal invasion of Ukraine. You knew very well who we are dealing with and know very well what it takes to counter it today. Now, Europe's political center of gravity has truly shifted east. Just a month ago, a Russian military drone was found in the eastern part of Latvia. Since then, drones have been spotted over Poland, Romania, Denmark, Germany, and Russian fighter jets have entered Estonian airspace. These are not isolated incidents. What we are facing is a new level of provocation on land, at sea, and now in the air. It's something that I experienced firsthand. During my most recent visit to Kiev a couple of weeks ago, I could really see how drones have really become the primary weapon of war. And I think all of this must finally serve as Europe's rallying call. We cannot afford to repeat past mistakes. Europe needs to take responsibility for its own security. We must strengthen our defense capabilities, deepen our interoperability, and above all, ensure that we are better prepared. It is an understanding that I am pleased, maybe a little relieved, to say that this is starting to take hold. Since 2021, EU defense spending has increased by more than 30%. And earlier this year, NATO members committed to raising their defense budgets to 5% of their GDP, something that would have been unthinkable even 1 year ago. However, money alone doesn't make us safer. If we keep working separately, if we are constantly duplicating efforts, if we are failing to plan, develop, and procure together, in Europe, we still function as 27 separate systems, and we operate with 178 different weapon systems. The United States, by comparison, has about 30. That kind of fragmentation means that we can produce all the ammunition we want, and we can reinforce each other with all the military equipment we can. But if our systems are incompatible, or if our forces are not trained to use them properly, then all our efforts risk falling short. That is what is slowing us down, and that is what is driving up costs. It's why the European Parliament keeps emphasizing, why me and my colleagues here today, including Latvian members of the European Parliament, keep emphasizing on the need for better coordination, greater coherence, and the capacity to operate as one system. It is what a real European security architecture must be designed to deliver. We're asked often, what do you mean by European security architecture? This is precisely what we mean. One that brings together our military, our industrial, our political and digital capacities. One that allows us to act faster, with more impact, and with one voice. Now, I do not want to be misinterpreted. NATO is and will always be the backbone of our collective territorial defense. And the partnership that we have with the United States is unique. There is no question about that. I think that in this dangerous world, it makes more, not less, sense to deepen partnership with like-minded partners, with Canada and the United Kingdom, for example. It's a point I recently made to leaders at the European Political Community meeting in Denmark last week. I also want to use this moment to recognize Latvia and the Baltic states' indispensable role in the NATO alliance. I deeply value your commitment, and I look forward to expressing my and the European Parliament's full support for our eastern flank, including efforts to strengthen security in the Baltic Sea during my visit to Camp Adazi with Prime Minister Selina later today. At the same time, the European Union has its own role to play. And that role is only growing in crisis management, in cyber and hybrid resilience, in strategic deterrence, in building defense capabilities. Not by duplicating what is already there, but by strengthening it. By building a solid European pillar within the alliance, and by strengthening the alliance as a whole. By ensuring, finally, peace through strength. By acting together, by living that age-old European truth, all for one and one for all. That's what Europe means. It's why the European Parliament has acted with unprecedented speed to adopt legislation that will help build economies of scale by aligning defense planning and procurement across Europe. And we are so close to reaching an agreement with member states on the European Defence Industry Programme This will aim to simplify processes, remove barriers, and support our defense industry's ability to develop and deliver at speed, hand in hand with Ukraine's industrial base. Now we are working to give member states greater flexibility in using EU funds so that they can invest in dual-use projects, including drone technology. During my visit to Kiev, President Zelensky was very clear, as he always is. Ukraine has both the field experience and industrial capacity to produce more drones. What they lack, however, is financing. With Latvia a leader in this field, I know you are aware that the impact that this kind of funding can have, support like this strengthens Ukraine's defense, but it also strengthens Europe's readiness. And it is precisely why we are pushing dual-use financing also in the discussion on the next European Union long-term budget. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I've spoken a lot about what the European Parliament is doing, what we are doing together, and what I think is needed to make our defense system stronger and more resilient, to build a security ecosystem that safeguards our territory and our people. But none of this will matter if we don't keep the war in Ukraine at the top of our agenda. Each of us has a role to play in pushing back against war fatigue. Now, we can agree or disagree about many things here, but one fact is indisputable. Ending the purchase of Russian gas and energy strikes at the very heart of Russia's war machine. We will do it faster than expected, and we will look to allies and partners. We should be proud of how far member states have gone in disentangling themselves from Russian energy, but we must go even further. Of course, phasing out these dependencies must be accompanied by a plan, but the excuses that have held us back for so many years until now are far, far from insurmountable. The same holds true on frozen Russian assets. At the end of the day, all of this, all our efforts coming together and really doing what we thought was impossible a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. This comes down to sustaining genuine peace. And it has come, in a way, to us as a surprise, I would say, as political representatives, as elected politicians, when we ask, what do we mean by peace? It's a word that we took for granted. It's a word that I was never asked about when my country joined the European Union together with this country, and we would be looking at economic stability, we would be looking at how we would grow as part of a strategic group of member states that have together common values and common projects. But what we perhaps forgot is that the European Union, at its very core, is a peace project. And peace takes effort. So when yesterday, after 733 long nights, an agreement that would see the remaining hostages released and a ceasefire in Gaza was finally agreed to, was something that we welcomed so much. This is a moment for peace and renewal in the Middle East. It opens a path that could finally end the intergenerational cycle of violence, of suffering and terror that has plagued the region. It must be respected and it must be thoroughly implemented. Peace is never easy. It takes difficult, sometimes uncomfortable, but necessary decisions. Whether that's playing a constructive role in ensuring the Gaza peace agreement holds, whether that is standing with Ukraine and remaining steadfast in the principle of nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, whether that is advancing merit-based enlargement as a clear geopolitical strategic priority, whether that's supporting democracy and countering Russian intimidation in our neighborhood. The election results in Moldova were encouraging, but make no mistake, the story is far from over. Or as I said at the very start of my few words today, whether that's pushing Europe to take responsibility over its own security. We need to get to the next level of defense. And here, Latvia just sent a strong signal of commitment to the world. For the first time in your history, you will serve on the UN Security Council. And on behalf of the European Parliament, I wish you every success. And I very much look forward to standing with you as the champion of these shared priorities. This is Europe's, I would say, security, whatever it takes moment. And we count on Latvia to help continue lead that drive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam President, for your words of inspiration and really the clear-eyed, piercing analysis. I think we can all agree that the time for excuses is indeed over, and building this security ecosystem, sustaining long-term support for Ukraine, and disentangling from Russian energy other dependencies is absolutely the way forward. I would now like to invite on stage Dr. Maria Golubeva, the founder of the crisis simulation startup Malaise, for a guided conversation with the president, and then hopefully some grilling from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this inspiring speech, President Metsola. And the first question is not going to, and welcome to the Riga conference. And the first question is probably not going to come as much of a surprise. We are here in the Nordic-Baltic region. It probably plays a special role. So my first question to you is, how do you see the role of the Nordic-Baltic region in the security and defense architecture of Europe, especially the security, which is not just territorial defense, also other aspects of it? And both as a region which has a lot to share, the experience to share from being so close to Russia, but also, of course, as beneficiary of the new European security and defense policies.
So when I said in my intervention a few moments ago that it took us way too long to realize and listen properly to our colleagues from the Nordic-Baltic region, that the threats were clear and they were getting closer and closer. And I say it openly and frankly, and you had Commissioner Kubilius here. I was his colleague in the European Parliament, and I can tell you there were endless moments late at night in debates where Andrius would tell us, you're just spending time on subjects that you should be focused on elsewhere. And I want to say it because I come from a country that is pretty far away from this region, but I'm married to a Finn. So it's also a very domestic conversation for me. I've spent the past 2 decades listening to exactly the same warning that Andrius Kubilius had given us. And it took all those years for Finland and Sweden to join NATO. A long domestic discussion also there as to whether that was the right step to take at the right time. But all it took was an illegal, unprovoked, unjustified invasion in the neighborhood to show that those threats have become real and have become closer. And the leadership that Latvia and the neighboring countries show, not only in putting money where their mouth is, in other words, that you really are the first leader of the pack to say we are going to increase our investment in defense, that we are going to match the GDP requirements of NATO, and that we are going to be at the forefront of saying we need more alliances on drones. We need to have more initiatives in order to help Ukraine, because Ukraine's security is also our security. I can tell you that if it was not for countries like this one, if I were a member of the European Parliament today legislating from a country that is much further away, I would perhaps be thinking, look, is this really a threat for us today? And that is what, thanks to Latvia, we are not in a position.
Indeed, and this already leads to the second question. Speaking of citizens in countries that are not so close to the front line, so to say, how do you think can citizens' expectations be managed? We have heard, for example, in the President of the European Commission's State of the Union address about the real socioeconomic problems, especially the housing crisis, other issues. And it is true that citizens in many countries say, well, there should be more money allocated for that. And sometimes question is asked, so why is so much money spent on defense and security? This is something that has to be managed because each of our member states is, of course, a democracy and elections matter, and the electoral cycle might bring results which would be less than ideal for our common security and our common future together. So how do we manage the citizens' expectations?
Well, the reality is that we need to be honest with them and admit that for many years we underspent and gave a false sense of security which wasn't. The reality is also that states of the alliance's commitments were not matched with the demands. That years would pass before commitments entered into effect. That we have developed parallel systems that are more costly than they need to be. That we only used to speak about the defense union as though it was something really far away on another planet. Similarly with the energy union, which came into focus when we had to uncouple very quickly from Russian gas. My point is that one expense in what guarantees the security of our citizens should not be played at the expense of another. Now, how do we do it? Citizens are right to ask that we need to make sure that there's security for all, just as they are right to ask that we need to make sure that we offer affordable and dignified housing for all, that access to free health and education across our continent are pillars that we will always defend and invest in. Now, we're being faced at the European level with big decisions on where we take our next multi-annual financial framework, budget for 7 years. It's always a big discussion as to where our priorities are. But what we have learned is that the current 7-year budget that we're currently sort of living through, wading through with great creativity, without the flexibility, is that what we thought was going to be good when we negotiated this batch absolutely is not fit for purpose today. So at least our eyes are wide open as to when we go into the next negotiation. And those next negotiations are going to have to be underpinned by a phenomenal, I would say, decision, much awaited, that member states' defense expenditure would not trigger the excessive deficit procedure. And that needs to be coupled with economic growth, with strengthening our competitiveness, with us investing more in trade, and with making sure we protect our businesses and our citizens. Is that going to be easy? Absolutely not. But if we don't go back to the very first thing I said, that we need to be honest, then we would be facing an argument where citizens feel further and further away from us and our decisions. And that will only mean elections of movements or systems that threaten the very being of everything we stand for.
Thank you very much. And going to the question of citizens and businesses being protected, you have mentioned a lot the need for a more common unified security architecture in Europe. And indeed, there is still a lot of disjointed security infrastructure, especially what concerns the silos. There is the cybersecurity silo, there is the cognitive warfare silo, people who are mostly in charge of tracing and responding to sabotage do not necessarily always immediately share this information with other member states. How do you see the task of the European institutions in making this work together to keep both citizens and businesses more secure for the next couple of years? Of course, lots of steps have been done. The cybersecurity documents that have been adopted, the NIS2, Critical Entities Directive, Cyber Solidarity Act, but probably most people in this room would agree there is space for more work. So how do you see the next steps?
Well, Absolutely. And there is always room for more steps, and we can always be faster. That's why we have reformed internally in the European Parliament in order to adopt legislation faster. We did it for procurement and defense, ammunition production in support of Ukraine, repurposing parts of Europe that could be now, let's say, invested in new types of jobs because of security and defense industry. We need to make cross-border procurement easier. We need to make sure we do not have borders that we've been so, I would say, we worked so hard to remove land borders, but we immediately reintroduce borders for anything else, for our businesses to be able to operate in more than one country, for our young, talented researchers to be able to use those talents in the European Union rather than losing them to other continents. And this all against the space of there is room to build modern, faster, better, also cheaper methods of infrastructure that protect us. Will this be easy? Absolutely not. You will still find a tendency to protect rather than be open to your neighbor. This is normal. But if the last 5 years, and I would say 5 years because it's been since the pandemic, has shown us is that alone we can't manage. And back to member states not sharing information, what is clear to all of us, that is what used to be covert is now overt. I mean, it's done brazenly, cynically even, to destabilize us. And the biggest success for those who seek to destabilize us would be for us not to talk to each other. And last week's meeting in Copenhagen sent the opposite message, which I came back and I took away with me a sense of, I would say, cautious optimism that finally we are in a situation where we can look forward to finding new proposals and being faster in the decisions we take. The Chancellor of Germany said something that will remain with me last week, that if we had, when Russia invaded Ukraine, been fast to help Ukraine with all the equipment, all the help that we've seen with our allies since, but in 2022, we would not be in the situation that we are in today. And I think that is something that we need to take away with us. That if the European Union and its allies, if NATO and its allies had acted fast in understanding that this is something that will threaten all of our security, then perhaps we would not be in the situation today. And it's a lesson for us all in the speed with which we react, but perhaps even more importantly, in having the capacity and readiness to react. That takes political will, it takes leadership, it takes courage, and it takes honesty. That where you could do better, you admit it.
Indeed, and readiness to react, I think, is what this conference is very much about. Now, I'm a little bit in a difficult spot because before the host mentioned that there should be some space for grilling by the audience. Do we still have 5 minutes for that? We do. All right, so let's have 2 questions. Please, in the front row, we have Edward Lucas.
Yes, hello, Edward Lucas. You talk about being honest, and that's vital. How are we going to pay for this without landing it all on the taxpayer in one lump? When we had this crisis in 1991, paying for the reconstruction of Europe, we set up a bank to do it, which was able to tap private sector savings. It also applied conditionality. My other worry is we raise the money and we throw it into a broken procurement machine, which is great for the share prices of the defence companies, not so great for everyone else. So how do we reform defence finance in a European context, bring in the UK and Norway, because they're big in one case and rich in the other, and get this done really quickly?
Shall we take all the questions?
All right, so let's take the second question from the gentleman over there.
Hi, my name is Avi Sahar. I'm Israeli Portuguese. I run an Austin-based startup in Tel Aviv. I'm also a speaker here. My question here is I listened to your really remarkable statement about the need, to rearm Europe, basically. And I would like to hear your reaction about, or your answer, about the convergence of interests between my country's war and the war in Ukraine when it comes to a Russian attempt to halt the Rearm Europe program. And I'm referring to the cooperation between European dock workers that we saw 2 weeks ago, labor unions in Genoa, in a meeting with basically every single dock worker union, 5 Palestinian organizations, 2 American organizations, basically proclaiming their desire to halt, rearm EU as the next step, as the evolution of the halting of supply chains to Israel. Like we tested it on a smaller conflict, now we're trying to implement it on a larger conflict. And I would love to hear your reaction. Is the EU prepared to the evolution or the convergence of conflicts, Ukraine, Middle East, that will affect Europe?
So there we have 2 questions, and I'm afraid we don't probably have time for more. So, President Metsola.
So for the second question, I would say that the Italian government has been very clear in making sure that rules are followed and laws are obeyed, and that humanity and peace reign. And this is, I would say, the thread that has been keeping us in looking for what was agreed yesterday morning for 2 years. I can tell you that exactly 2 years ago, I was in Israel on the site of the attacks, and those memories have meant that I have been placed it upon my responsibility to make sure that we work for peace in order for us to continue to be able to have an interconnected world. Whether that means interconnected in terms of people, humanity, but also in terms of interoperability of systems and also economic growth. And I'll jump to the first question with the words economic growth, because perhaps what you are correct in saying that we've spent now the past 5 years in essentially just talking about how we need to find more money to pay for first a crisis and then another. But there has not been at the same time a real push to make sure that we are more agile as economies. And I'm very encouraged by the UK government and the Prime Minister's push for what he calls the coalition of the willing, which is not only a political or a military coalition, but it's also an economic one. If we don't have interoperability between the EU and Norway and the UK, prices will remain incredibly high. If we don't grow our economies, we will continue to lose in the competition with China, India, but also the United States. If we don't make it easy in our continent to start up, but then to scale up, we lose our best. If we think that only our products are the best at the expense of people who struggle to pay their hospital bills, their school bills, and their rent, then we're not doing our job. Now, what's the answer to this? Do we turn our back to Ukraine on the basis of this? Absolutely not. What is happening in Ukraine could happen anywhere else. But does that also mean a harsh realization that we will need to be better and flexible at the way we finance, what we spend it on, how we procure, and how we can move even equipment from one country to another? I'll take you back to the very first days of the war, when it took months to move helmets that had been sitting in one member state to Ukraine on the basis of licensing and patenting and essentially movement across what are supposedly non-existent borders. Now, this does not apply to the United Kingdom, but I started by saying that that coalition, that willingness of your government into saying that this is something we are willing to join forces on is what keeps us going too. Because then we know we're doing what is right. And if you know that what you're doing is right and you believe in it, then you need to find the ways to finance it. And there are different options on the table, of course. I referred to immobilized assets. I referred also to the excessive deficit procedure exception for defense spending. All of this difficult, but is an option on the table, which was, I would say, impossible until a year or two ago. And that is something that we need to recognize as willingness to do really whatever it takes for security.
Thank you very much indeed, President Metsola, and I hope all agree that this deserves a round of applause.
Also, thank you, Maria Golova, for hosting this conversation, and thank you for honesty, and President, thank you for your human aspect in all this. But as you know, Riga conference mainly is security.